Changeworking, moving minds for change that lasts.
Hello, friends, and welcome to Changeworking, a show for practitioners and coaches who help their clients create change. My name is Ruckus, and as always, I'll be in conversation with James Tripp. Today, we're exploring identity, how who you think you are affects how you behave, how your beliefs about the world and your beliefs about yourself interact, and the idea that all change work requires some kind of shift in identity. I also share a personal story from my own therapy sessions about identity, one that really surprised me. So here's my conversation with James about identity and how shifts in self-concept can transform. I have a lot of interest in identity.
Right.
And I'm very curious to talk about identity as a component of change work for the client. So that I'm just curious about thoughts about that when it comes to change work.
Right. Identity is one of those things that is a bit like, talking about, soul or change work or hypnosis or whatever. It's like, well, what do you specifically mean by that? Now, what I mean by that is there are certain terms. I mean, it's like authenticity. That's a word that goes around, right? It's like, what do we mean by that? And different people will mean different things. I have a particular interest in soul at the moment, what it means for something to have soul. Because most people will say, that's got soul, or they'll go, yeah, it's got no soul. And they've got a sense of what that means. But if you ask them to say explicitly what you mean by that, it's like, well, I don't quite know. Now, identity is an interesting thing in that sense. And the way I'm going to take it when you say identity is I'm going to take it as the kind of unconscious sense that we make of ourselves. Often it's got a kind of narrative quality to it. It positions us as a certain sort of person in a certain sort of life. And for most people, their identity is not explicitly known. In modern times, there's this idea people now start to say, I identify as, and they give these sort of kind of left hemisphere checklist. Now, I think this is a very, very modern thing. Identity is not traditionally been an explicit thing. It's been an implicit thing. Not something we sit there and we go, well, what am I? It's just we have this sort of sense of self, who we are, how we are, where we belong in the world. So identity in this sense could be akin to what you might call our autobiographical self, or the way some people conceptualize the ego. But we have to be able to make sense of ourselves. This is an important thing. And essentially, we have to be able to make sense of anything. So anything that we identify, right? So if I identify that as my guitar over there, which nobody can see me gesturing towards, but I am. So I identify that as my guitar over there. The idea of guitar, I have a whole bunch of sense about that helps me make predictions about what's possible with that, what might happen if I interact with it in certain ways, what might happen if somebody else interacts with it, what might happen if I drop it out the window. Right? That helps me make choices about how I interact with that, how I relate to it. So, when we have an identity, it sets our kind of relationship to self. I think this is a hugely important thing. Now, I think there's some argument that could be made. It might be a very good argument that all change work requires some kind of reorganization of identity. That it is our identity, our sense of this is who I am, this, even if we don't explicitly know what it is, it's unconscious. It sort of stabilizes us being a certain way, showing up a certain way. It keeps a default set of what's possible, what's not possible for me or somebody like me, and it's the base of how we experience ourselves in the world. Now, if deep down part of my organization of self is that I'm like some kind of weird misfit or something like that, when I show up around other people and I've got this kind of identity of weird misfit, I might not know it consciously, but it might be there, something like that, deep down in my semantic base, so to speak. It's going to create a certain experience of being in those contexts where I'm around other people, perhaps people I don't know or not. But if I have a sense of self or identity that says, I'm a good person, or I'm a likable person, I'm a fun, charismatic person or something, my experience of myself in that context is going to be entirely different because all my threat assessments are going to be different, right? This is another thing, by the way. A lot of our experience in the world is based upon how secure do we feel, how grounded do we feel, or how unsafe and how threatened do we feel, right, at any given moment in time. Now, if you think about something like safety and security, the question is, where does a sense of safety or security come from, right? Now, what I would say is an interaction between our map of self, i.e. our identity, and our map of the world. So if I have a map of the world that basically includes in it details like the world is basically safe, everything's going to be okay, whatever, or perhaps I am one with the universe, perhaps my map of the world is the universe takes care of me, I'm going to feel really safe there, maybe regardless of my sense of self. Now, if I think that the world, on the other hand, is a place full of threats and dangers and difficulties, I may feel threatened by that unless I have an identity of perhaps something like I'm a massively competent individual and I can handle most stuff that comes my way. In which case, even in a world of apparent threats and dangers, I may well feel pretty safe and secure, like I got a handle on things. So I think that's a huge element. I think it was Nathaniel Branden that said self-concept is destiny. Now, we could be talking about the same thing as identity there, but self-concept is destiny. And what he meant by that basically is, whether you think you can or whether you think you can't, you're right. Because it's going to change how you show up, how you engage. If I go into a job interview, for example, and I see myself like, man, I could handle this job. I got everything I need. That's part of my identity, part of my self-concept. I'm going to roll into that interview and I'm going to sit down like so grounded that there's a good chance I'm going to get that job. But if on the other hand, I see a job and I think, wow, I'd love to do that, but it's going to be a real stretch for me. I don't know if I'm going to be able to handle it. I need to convince them that I can handle it, even though I'm not sure that I can. I may as well take a chance. My self-concept is that of, I don't know if I can handle this. I might be in over my head. I'm going to try and bluff it, but I'm going to show up and my ground of being that I'm coming from is going to be very different. So it's going to decrease the likelihood that I'll get the job, right? So this is the thing. My beliefs about a coffee cup, for example, I often use this example. My beliefs about a coffee cup, if I believe that it's absolutely tough and resilient and I drop it out the window of the third floor here onto the sidewalk, right? My beliefs about it won't change what happens when it hits the sidewalk. It's not going to change anything, probably. But my beliefs about myself change a lot because I'm not an inanimate thing, right? I'm a live organism, right? A psychosocial actor, so to speak. So my beliefs about myself, my actual resilience, my ability to meet the moment is changed by my belief about things. So I think identity is a huge thing. One of the things that I'll sometimes do in change work is when there's a big shift, I might ask a question like, and I wonder what this might mean about who you really are and who you're becoming right now.
That's nice.
Right? Because I want to weave that back up to identity level. There's some things I like about narrative therapy, some things I dislike about narrative therapy as well. One of the things I like about narrative therapy is this idea that we do have a story of self. And that actually there are many possible stories of self. There isn't just one story of self. We could tell so many different stories. I mean, you're a guy that writes stories, right? You're a guy that creates stories. And you know that a story is not just a sequence of events. There's a curation about what events get drawn into the foreground, what get put into the background, what significance each moment is given. And we kind of do this in our own lives. We create this story of self. Some things get brought into the foreground and given certain significance. And so we weave a particular sort of, narrative through our lives. And that narrative could be one that's incredibly empowering. or it could be one that's incredibly disempowering. So one of the approaches of narrative therapy is to start to draw out perhaps forgotten memories, forgotten instances, things that might say something really incredibly positive about who you are, what your values are. So it's kind of starting to rebuild this story of self, rebuild this identity, if you like. And I think that's a really powerful thing to do. That's one of the things I really like about narrative therapy. And I think once you've got that lens in the mix and you think, we want this person to experience themselves a certain way, a resourceful, capable person, as a worthwhile person, as a worthy person, as a person who is fit for purpose, maybe as a person who has qualities about themselves that they can actually admire. These are valuable things. People who move through the world with a good self-concept usually have a generally good experience. And often that creates these feedback loops where good things tend to come their way. And people with a lousy self-concept, often they show up like they're kind of hanging back, they're laying low. There's a lot of go stop in their lives. The energy they sometimes bring is one of self-doubt, and people buy what's solid. So if we're lacking solidity in our own sense of self, people can be a little bit more like, so we don't get such good generative feedback loops unfolding out into the world around us. So yeah, I think identity is a huge thing. I think it's well worth remembering that we're always making sense of ourselves. And a good part of change work is helping people to not just make sense of the world differently, it's make sense of themselves. One last thing I'll say on this. In NLP, they often talk about the map of the world, right? Your map of the world. And you could say, that's everything that we believe about how the world works, about what is or isn't so. It's all unconscious, our map of the world. And you could argue that that includes a map of self, right? But I think it's a useful distinction to make between map of the world and map of self, right? You could argue that one, map of self is nested in the map of the world because we assume we live in the world. But really, a lot of our experience is we can go, right, we want to change the sense we make of the world, but we're often looking to change the sense we make of ourselves, right? And a change in one or the other can make a huge difference. But there's some kind of reciprocal interaction between those two things. So yeah, definitely identity, self-concept, self-image, ego, story of self, autobiographical self, however many ways we want to talk about it, it's hugely significant.
Well, you just said that was literally my next question is, are those all the same thing, or are those just different words for the same thing, or is there a nuance to each?
So I think they're all kind of pointing at the same thing in different ways. Okay. Almost everything we're dealing with when we're dealing with human beings, the world around us, the psychosocial reality that we inhabit, we're always dealing with complexity. And this means that we're always talking about things that are not only more complex or rich, if you prefer, than we think, but they are more complex or rich than we can think. So we're always sort of using concepts and words to kind of grope in the dark or point towards something. And I think all of these are pointing towards the same thing. There's an old Zen saying, which is, when there's a finger pointing at the glory of the moon, do not focus too much on the finger or you'll miss the glory of the moon.
That's really nice.
Yeah. So all of these things, I think, are fingers pointing at the glory of the moon. What we're really talking about is this same thing, but there's only so much we can say about it in this explicit way. And I think this is why when people ask an explicit question, who am I? They cannot get an answer. They cannot get a satisfactory answer, right? And there's a danger, by the way, I think, in people going, it really pays to know who you are. Like it said above the Temple of Apollo in Delphi, know thyself, right? This is a classic inscription, know thyself. Oh, I've got to know who I am. That doesn't mean a left hemisphere knowing. It doesn't mean a Wikipedia article necessarily that says who you are. A lot of this is much more right hemisphere, much more in the body and in the being, in the felt sense system. It can help to explore that using the verbal mind. it can help, but it's got to be in relation with the non-verbal mind, the embodied mind, if you like, as well.
It's really interesting, the multiple words for, you said identity, self-concept, map of self, because I've been doing a lot of work in the last year, particularly around identity. I've been doing a lot of thinking about this, and a lot has come up in I started to do weekly therapy around this. And identity is what I've been struggling with all year. But when you say self-concept, I get completely different answers. When I say, what's my identity? I have answers. When you say self-concept, it's suddenly softened and I get completely different answers.
Right.
And I just found that super interesting.
Yeah. Well, I think that highlights the nature of the linguistic side of hypnosis, what people call hypnosis. One of the things I'm always teaching when I'm teaching hypnosis is we're using words not, we're thinking about communication not in terms of information, but in terms of evocation. So it's like each word has got its own interior quality to it. It might mean the same thing in a left hemisphere sense. You can go, well, this means the same thing. In philosophy or in 20th century kind of philosophy of language, there's the distinction between denotation and connotation. But like a classic example is you might say, I met a terrorist yesterday. Or you might say, I met a freedom fighter yesterday.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, you're using the word terrorist and freedom fighter to denote, to point to the same person. Right? So they're different. They're two different fingers pointing to the same person. But the fingers themselves are very, very different. They have a very different connotation. The denotation is the same, but the connotation is very different. Now, connotation, when we look at connotation, that's something like if you go, well, what's the connotation? It's only ever something that comes through the felt sense system, the feeling of what happens, right? This is how we know. Like this, right then, as soon as you shifted from identity to self-concept, it's like, oh, that's qualitatively different for you. And I would say, how do you know it's qualitatively different?
The answers that came up were completely different answers.
Right.
For one thing.
So different stuff comes through.
Yeah.
It kind of hooks you up in a different way.
My entire body relaxed when I asked myself that self-concept versus identity.
Right. So that's the interesting thing. That's the somatic side I'm looking at. The body relaxes. Right. There's a different quality in the experience, a more relaxed quality. So a lot of times when doing change work, that's the essence of a good, what they call reframe in NLP, right? You just shift something slightly and, now the relationship changes, the experience changes. What gets seen through that lens changes, right? So like a lot of the time when doing change work, you're looking to offer sometimes subtle, but sometimes big re-renderings of things. When I talk about re-rendering something, that's what we've done just there. Not without that was the intention to do it. It just happened to work that way. When we re-render identity as self-concept, it changes something for you, right? It's almost like your consciousness around it shifts subtly.
Yeah, and I would say subtly, but also it was so dramatic that I brought it back up again.
Right.
If you don't mind, I'm going to give my answers because I think this will be insightful.
Yeah.
As if I was the client. When you said identity, I was thinking I'm a filmmaker, I'm a storyteller, I'm a businessman, whatever. It's like that's almost my outward role.
Yeah.
And when you said self-concept, I said I'm kind to people, I'm loving,
right,
I'm helpful. I was like, whoa! It just in my head, I was just surprised. Like that's a completely different approach to what could be almost the same question.
So that shift, that shift in languaging, the shift in how it's rendered up, changes what you're accessing through that. But totally part of you. So it's going to bring more dimensions. I wonder what the other ones might bring as well. It's an interesting thing to, toggle through.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think for the purposes of thinking through anyone listening to this and how they can work with their clients, just that small thing of, I told you I've been working on my identity for a year, and I suddenly just said, what if I worked on my self-concept for a year? How different would that be?
Yeah.
That's a whole different thing.
Right.
Yeah.
What about
super interesting?
just as I'm just throwing this out there,
Sure.
not to say it's good.
Yeah.
What about sense of self?
Yeah, that sense of self. I feel like that's something. It almost becomes slightly spiritual, and I feel like, how am I grounded in the world, and how do I connect to others? Yeah, I don't know how to explain it other than it felt sort of spiritual. It's a completely different answer.
Right. So this is a good example, like when people go, well, how does hypnosis work? Right? Hypnosis as a word has got a bunch of connotations itself, not often particularly useful ones. But really, like, maybe a better question is, how does language work to help, to connect things up in certain ways? And we often think, well, oh, that's what I said. We're talking about the same thing. Yeah, but when we talk in different ways, what gets evoked, this is why I'm always saying evocation, not information. Right? If I just speak to you thinking in terms of information, right? There's some information I wish to convey to you. Well, the words I choose will evoke entirely different connections within you. So if I'm unaware of that, then I can't really be an effective hypnotic communicator, let's say. Or if people don't like the frame hypnotic communicator, I don't know, an effective mind shifter or whatever it will be. I want to be able to think in terms of evocation like that.
I was just thinking about folks who just are more in the coaching space versus classic hypnotists. And you could literally just say, if your coaching client is talking about identity, and you shift the question to ask them about self-concept, not having to think about any of the hypnotic languageness but it's a very coaching thing. But you'll get the same shift.
Yeah, you will.
Yeah.
One of my favorite moves, you see, because often when you hear a client speak, they'll be talking about things in a particular way, right? They're stuck in one way of talking about something. When you shift the language or the conceptual rendering, you can get a huge move. This is one of the places I will use. My bias is towards felt sense here, but often when I'm hearing a client speak in a certain way, and I'm aware that their organization of reality is keeping them stuck, or it's got them as far as it's going to get them. So like if somebody's kind of stuck and they're not making progress, it's like, okay, I might just often offer a simple change in frame. I'll say, so just say that to say that again, right? Okay, I'm looking to figure something out about my identity. And then I offer a different framing, which has got the same denotation, points to the same thing, but it's a different connotation. It's a different finger doing the pointing. I'll say, just check in. What's the difference between those two for you? And often it's like, oh, this is like this, and this is like, and a whole new world opens up. And I'll see in this moment, which one seems to be more useful for you? And often it's the new one. And the reason it's the new one is not necessarily because I'm so brilliant that I knew best. It's just because it's new. Right. A lot of the time. So it opens up new doorways. It creates new connections. So now fresh new stuff can come through instead of them being stuck in the same conceptual rendering, which is running the same kind of stuck loop that may have borne fruit at some point, but has probably borne all the fruit that it's going to bear by now. So I just say something about Robert Kegan. He has an interesting way of talking about this. He says that the thing that therapy offers people that's of immense value that most people overlook is a new language culture. That's the term he uses, language culture. And what he means is, I might use the term reality tunnel, different set of conceptual renderings. There's so many different ways you can talk about this. I always think it's valuable to have multiple ways to talk about things. Yeah. But that's it. You're helping the client make different sense. So, but that's often better done, not by saying, not that, this, i.e., stop pointing at that, point at this instead. It's like, what you're pointing at there, let's point at it differently with a different idea, a different word, a different, I like that term, conceptual rendering. It's a personal favorite of mine. Perhaps I overuse it, but it's that idea. It's like, let's shift the way we're holding this. Let's hold it differently, metaphorically speaking, with some slightly different phrasing or different words or something, and see what that evokes that's different, or see what that connects up that's different. And then we can follow that line through as to what further difference that makes. It's a very good way of getting people out of being stuck, because they tend to think about their stuff in the same way, with the same kind of, linguistics, the same kind of conceptual renderings. And if it's not moving through, I've said this before, patterns to perpetuate versus patterns that play through. See, if it's not playing through on a creative line, if it's now just perpetuating a stuck loop, often just changing those linguistic units can lead to things playing through, which is, I think, the real strength of taking, say, what you might call a neuro-linguistic approach to things. That's what that really has to offer, and it's a powerful offering indeed. In a lot of ways, this is the thing that I think people miss with change work. They don't see the arc. They don't see the long arc. They see somebody showing up with a problem, somebody showing up with a challenge, with an issue, and they're like, right, and they focus in on the challenge or the issue and the problem, and they go, right, we gotta get something moving here. And there seems to be this kind of idea, particularly in the world of direct hypnosis and NLP. It's like, you saw the client for how many sessions? Well, I'd have done that in one session. Done what in one session? Ended the client's life? Stopped their arc, brought them to the very end of their history? Is that what you'd have done in one session? People are on a journey in life. They are, they come into the world and they are on a journey. There's always a long arc. It's not, I've put myself in exactly the right format right now. It might be the format right now for this moment in your life, but it is going to be well adapted in 6 months or next week, or when the context changes, when your job changes, when your relationships change, when, something else changes, when you've juiced this bit for all that it's got and you want to move on, right? Those moments in life, this is why there is no getting our identity right. There's no getting our self-concept right. It's just, how is it working in the context of our life right now? We have, across our journey of life, we have the need to update and refresh our self-concept all the time. If we're not doing it, we rapidly become stagnant, and life moves and changes, but we don't, because life doesn't stop moving and changing. So we've got to change and move with life in order to be able to fit with life. Gregory Bateson, he updated, actually, I think it was Bateson's father that did this, but the Darwinian idea of survival of the fittest. Bateson said it's not survival of the fittest, it's survival of the fit, right? We have to fit, right? We have to find how we fit with life. Now, life is constantly moving and life is constantly changing. That doesn't mean we subordinate ourselves to it. It's just like, we want to bring through what's uniquely us, but find how we make that fit so we can fit with the world, we can fit with the flow of life. So I think that this means our self-concept, our self-image is going to get stale fast if it doesn't get updated, right? It's going to start being a bad fit for life as life changes. So it can be of incredible value to be doing that kind of work reasonably regularly. There's an argument to be made that life gets difficult when our self-concept stops fitting what's going on around us. And certainly a lot of the work that I do over the last 8 years, I've worked a lot with armed forces veterans, and people go, there must be a lot of PTSD work, right? It's like, yeah, there's that kind of stuff in the mix, but the big issue much of the time is that they had a self-concept that fitted with being an active, being in the armed forces. And a lot of the people I work with, 80% have got a medical discharge. They didn't want to leave. And now they're living in a completely different world. Maybe they've become, they're doing telephone installations or delivering white goods or something like that. It's like, what the heck does this mean about me? I was there doing something meaningful. I was a Marine, for example, and now I'm like working. Now I'm driving an Uber or whatever it will be. Mm-hmm. It's like there's a whole new sense to be made of self and life. That's the big challenge that often comes up for people. And by the way, I will say this, just to mention what people call PTSD. A lot of the time people have had traumatic, quote unquote, events occur. And whatever's been occurring as an after effect of that, they've handled it reasonably well, really quite well. But then something else happens in life that throws them right off their life path, their sense of where they're going and who they are. And now those symptoms flare up like crazy. Right? And they flare up like crazy because the person lost their sense of direction. They lost their sense of their place in the world. And that's all based on map of the world, map of self. It's how those fit together. So self-concept, identity, whatever you want to call it, this is a key part of that. So in that kind of work, working with those sorts of transitions in life, touching back on what is really in that person's heart, you could say, or what their unique expression is, the stuff that has them come alive, the stuff that really means something to them, and finding how that can be brought into this new life, this new world. That's really important work to do, I would say.
You said earlier, change work requires changes in identity.
Yeah.
Does that mean as a practitioner, you go directly at the client's identity by listening to it and encouraging changes? Or are those changes in an identity a result of other types of work indirectly?
I think you could go, my business is identity. You could take that view. You could put that lens on things. In fact, my friend Damon Cart, he works, like one of his major pieces as a coach is Steve Andreas's self-concept work, right? And that the whole business of that is changing your self-concept to one that serves you better. That's it. So he's a coach. So he's not got people coming to him going, I've got terrible anxiety, right? He's got people coming to him going, I want to do this self-concept work. Now, it depends largely on what's the context you work in. How do you frame yourself in the world? In what capacity are people coming to you? Because if you say, I'm an anxiety specialist, right? And they come in and you start hammering straight for self-concept in a really direct and explicit way, you might get a lot of pushback because it's like, well, hang on a second. What about my anxiety? And you go, oh no, if we do this other thing that you can't see yet that's got something to do with your anxiety, then it's going to help you out with your anxiety. Okay. So it's probably not going to land well. So if somebody comes in, they go, I've got anxiety and I want to just do something about this. I'm sick of it. It's ruining my life. You kind of want to meet people where they're at. So that's my view on it. Now, I want to have a recognition all the time that self-concept is destiny, that we want to have some change at that level. But the entry point is going to be where they come in. So it won't necessarily be that we go directly there. We'll start getting mind shifts happening in other areas. And then we want that to weave into how they perceive themselves. Right? Now, there's every chance that will anyway if we're doing good work. But there's little extra nudges that we can add in. So this is why, what's your new truth now? Or I wonder what that might say about who you are and who you are becoming. Or if we have an awareness, we can start weaving changes we make back in at an identity level. Or we could just say right up front, my work is helping people rework their identity. And here are the effects of it. Do you want to come and work with me and do that? In which case you've got that as an explicit frame.
I see.
So there's more to it. There's not like a correct way to work. It's like if I want to do trance work explicitly and I want to put it in the frame of trance work, well, it serves to say, hang my shingle up and say, James Tripp, trance work guy, right? Then people come in and do trance work with me. If I hang up, I shingle and I say James Tripp, psychotherapist, or James Tripp, counselor, right? And I'm framing myself as a counselor, and I go, yeah, but trance work's really good. I've got a lot more work to do to take people to that place because they come in with different set of expectations. So could be either. You could go one way, you could go the other way, you could go both ways at the same time.
I want to tell you a little story that has to do with identity and my therapist, just to see if it sparks anything. My map of the world changed dramatically once I started learning about parts work. And you know how much I love parts work. And to me, it explains all human behavior. Maybe that's overly simplistic. That's how I approach it. So I've been doing for a year weekly parts work therapy sessions, specifically IFS, with the same therapist who I love. We had tons of great work. Suddenly, I found myself after about a certain point in a year becoming incredibly critical of her during sessions and stopping in the middle of the sessions and pointing out things she was doing that I didn't like. And this went on for about 2 sessions, and I was about to stop seeing her. So I did my own self-work, which I do daily parts work. I checked in with the critical part, and it told me, you've changed so much about your identity over the last year. If you keep changing, then who am I? Who am I if I don't know who I am anymore because you've made so many changes and it did not want me to keep making changes. And so I was being so critical with her because it wanted me to stop.
Right.
I just found that really interesting. I was so surprised at what the answer was, the reason why. And so the next session, all that went away because I understood. It was just scared of that shift in identity and how much had changed.
Right. You know, and I think it's a very interesting spotlight that story brings, because a lot of the time that happens a lot. You know, people, I think even Byron Katie sometimes sort of makes a joke, you know, about this. She'll say, you know, there's a lot at stake here, right? You could lose your mind, you know, this kind of thing. It's like, well, actually, that's what we want to do. We want to, you know, you could lose yourself. You could metaphorically die, right? There's a kind of existential death. And it's interesting to me, you know, the Taoists say, or at least the Tai Chi teachers I had say, in order to profit, you must invest in loss. Right? So one of the things that we're losing sometimes is who we thought we are, you know, who we thought we were. But like, people don't want to be unmoored in the world. So often, like, there's this weird thing that people will start to defend really debilitating self-concepts sometimes, because it's a greater fear to not know who I am than to hold on to my kind of limiting ideas like, whoa, now I don't know. And I suspect this is one of the reasons, if you look at Erikson's work, Erikson was really big on I don't know. He loved I don't know. He loved you don't need to know. And he would say it with a wonder and a glitter, I don't know. And maybe you don't know. You know, he was always emphasizing I don't know as a wonderful space of possibilities. You know, because otherwise, when people go off the edge of the map, if you think of those old maps, they end somewhere and it's there be dragons beyond. You know, people are fearful of losing their sense of things. You know, in a sense, if you think about people using psychedelics, people are often fearful when they're going to like do some DMT or something. Well, yeah, rightly so. Because your stabilized maps of everything they're going to fall apart now. They're going to dissolve for a time. And you're going to go into unknown territory, you know, which is, if you look at it through the sort of shadow lens, is the realm of uncertainty. If you look at it through the kind of light side, it's the realm of possibility, of perhaps infinite possibilities. You know, so I guess by bringing it into consciousness like that for you, you get to make a choice. Do I want to go there? Right? Or other parts of you get to make a choice. Right? Okay, do we want to go there? Do we want to go off the edge of the map? You know, and it's like, okay, yeah, okay, let's do it. Let's go off the edge of the map.
So there you go. Hope you enjoyed that conversation. I loved the moment when I realized that the answers to what is my identity and what is my self-concept were different. And then James pushed me to answer, what is my sense of self? And those answers were different too. That just speaks to the beauty of language and how asking different questions can reveal things you weren't aware of. So maybe that could be an interesting path to explore with one of your clients. If so, here are 7 ways you can ask: identity, self-concept, sense of self, map of self, self-image, ego, and who am I? If you've got thoughts, questions, or ideas for future topics, we'd love to hear from you. You can email us at changeworkingpod@gmail.com. See you next time.
Changeworking is produced by Ruckus Sky. For information on training, go to clientshifts.com.